Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all so much for attending the first ever North Carolina Compost Council's ComCon, Composting Conversations, in celebration of International Compost Awareness Week, also known as ICAW. ICAW is the largest and most comprehensive education initiative in the composting industry with the goal of working together to raise public awareness on why we should all be composting and using compost. It is celebrated worldwide each year with events held during the second week in May, just like this one. ICAW efforts also include a poster and video contests that are held each fall, and those contests are based on a theme. Behind me, you can see the winner of this year's poster contest. The theme was for healthier soil, healthier food, compost. And the winner was Junchi Tan of Singapore. It just goes to show you this is truly an international celebration, and it shows that compost has the power to unify people all around the world for healthy soils, healthy food, and our beautiful earth. I want to give a shout out to and credit to the incredible Renee Wallace. She's Executive Director of Food Plus Detroit. She held the first compost conversation like this last year during ICAW, Compost Conversations all week. And I want to thank you, Renee, for the inspiration. You can read more about her work in the March 6th National Cultivating Community Composting Forum blog in BioCycle magazine, as well as on the Food Plus Detroit Facebook page and other social media. I also want to thank the North Carolina Composting Council for supporting ICAW and now ComCon. The North Carolina Composting Council is a nonprofit chapter of the U.S. Composting Council. We're comprised of about 60 members statewide, and we're governed by a volunteer board of directors. I'm the board president. My name is Muriel Williman, and I pulled together this week's program with the generous contributions of time and talent by the volunteer speakers. A number of our speakers this week are also board members. The work of the board and the council is done through volunteer committee. So if you're interested in learning more or pitching in, please visit the North Carolina Compost Council website or email info@compostingcouncil.com. I also want to thank my employer, the City of Durham, who supports me supporting the efforts of composting around the state and internationally too, apparently. The woman who is managing the Zoom room, popping the kernels in the chat, who created the gorgeous outreach poster that you all saw, she handled the registrations. She's doing all the technology, including social media that boosted this event, is Kate Sullivan, North Carolina Compost Council Treasurer. Thank you so much, Kate. And she'll be sharing a few nuggets later as well. Thank you to the speakers and for all of you for being here. The way this is going to go, just a little housekeeping, is that we're going to mute all participants except for the speaker while they talk for 20 to 30 minutes. And then during their talk, we encourage participants to use the chat. Say who you are, where you're from, why you're here, ask any questions related to the topic at hand. And after the speaker is finished, we will unmute the group and start the conversation. Folks can just chime in as you would in a regular conversation, ask questions, comment. We do ask that people limit their share to about 4 minutes or so to give everybody the opportunity. And Kate will close out the session with a few exciting announcements. And without further ado, please let me introduce our host, Genesis from NewSoil Vermiculture.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I have a presentation scheduled for you all. Oh my gosh, this is so exciting. Very happy to be here. This is, this is a super cool opportunity for us to get to do. I'm going to share my screen right now so you get to see the presentation that I made. Okay. Can everyone see it? Just a thumbs
Looks great,
up.
Genesis.
Thank you very much. Awesome. So Compost Castings and Community is the title. If you found out about this through Instagram, thanks for coming. I posted this. I have found in a lot of the conversations that I've had at the Durham Farmers Market, at
New stuff is so freaking millennial.
at our personal site, that people know a lot of information about the sustainability of a worm bin, about what worms can do for us, yet the conversation about where worms come from, how they function, and how integral they are to keeping us alive is really lacking in comparison. At NewSoil, we think it's really important that compost education across all communities is taught comprehensively, and we think it's deeply important for the longevity of human beings. We need to have care and compassion for worms, because not only do they keep us alive, but they have their own functions as well that deserve to be talked about. So to introduce myself again, my name is Genesis. I work for NewSoil Vermiculture. My boss, Corey, is in the audience right now. Well, yeah, my boss, Corey, is in the audience right now. And we are in Durham. We're in North Durham. What I do personally, I am the vermiculture specialist, if you will, farmers market assistant. I work with the compostables drop at Durham Farmers Market, and I also manage the Instagram. Essentially what that all means is that I help take care of the worms, help feed them, help harvest them. Usually if you're talking to someone to pick up your order at the Durham Farmers Market, I'm the person you're talking to. I also do the compostables drop, but I'll talk a bit about that a little later in the presentation. So since this is not a traditional talk about vermiculture, meaning that a lot of talks I've attended about vermiculture center around how to build a worm bin or how vermiculture works exactly, or how to manage a compost bin system. Since we're not going to be talking explicitly about that in this conversation in the final 30 minutes, please ask any questions that you have about that. Corey and I are both super knowledgeable about that subject, and we can totally help you out with that. I have talked about this a little bit before. If you talked to me at the market about how to make a worm bin, I've said that having worms and not knowing about worm anatomy or how they move through the world is like having a dog and not knowing anything about it. Essentially, when we're inviting worms into our home to compost for us, to eat our food and create castings, they essentially become our pets. We're taking care of them, we're feeding them, we're keeping them comfortable, and in turn, we're getting something in return. With a dog, you might get love and affection. With worms, you get sustainability and usable castings for the health of your plants. And we think it's really important that you know how your worms work, beyond, oh, they're chewing up my food and pooping it out, but how they actually work, what their anatomy is like, how do they mate, why do they come to the surface when it rains, things like that, that I'll talk about in this presentation. But if you're going to keep worms as pets or even not, we think it's important that you know a little bit about them. And their processes are actually very integral to learning about the ecosystem's functions, and developing, like I said, care and compassion for them. And in my opinion, developing care and compassion for the animals that are at the foundation of our ecosystem as we know it today translates into having care and compassion for those of us that are at the foundation of our social ecosystem, like farmers and miners and other manual laborers. You don't have to raise your hand if you know the thing. This is not like a question and response yet, but I am going to be going through some worm facts, ranging from their anatomy to their native environment. And like I said, if you have questions, wait till the last 30 minutes. But if you have some more worm facts ranging from anatomy to native environment or something else that I don't mention, feel free to put it in the chat. So a big question that I get is from children mostly, really, is how do worms mate? I put an asterisk next to worms because this process differs from species to species in some cases. Like earthworms mate differently than other types of worms. So but for red wigglers in particular, they mate like this, how you're seeing in the photo. They sort of wrap themselves around each other like this. And it's more towards the head. So this is one head and this is the other head, and they wrap like this. Really cool about worms, they are genderless. There's no male or female worms. They all have male and female ovaries and sperm reproductive organs. When they mate, they both become pregnant, if you will. And they have these cocoons that they lay. Now I'm going to show you here the worm anatomy board that I created what this process is sort of like. So here you can see their male and female reproductive organs are pretty close to their mouths here. They're right here. They're actually, the sperm and the ovaries are very close to each other. They cannot inseminate themselves. They do need another partner for that. So you can see that the mouth is here. They've got a lot of things going on in the throat area. There's a lot that's needed to break up the food, the dirt, the dead plant matter, the dead animal matter that they're eating, because worms are omnivores. So they've got a lot of different things going on here. They also have 5 hearts. They have one main heart, and then they have 4 auxiliary hearts, which is pretty cool. And they're like stacked like this, pretty close to their brain. And yes, worms do have brains. And you'll see this band right here. If you see this right here, this sort of bulging part right here is called the clitellum. The clitellum is where the cocoons come out of. So in every cocoon, there's about 1 to 20 eggs, depending on the species of worms. For red wigglers, it's about 1 to 20, 4 to 20, but I'll say 1 to 20 just in case things happen. 1 to 20 eggs per cocoon. And they look like little lemon seeds. I can't see any in this photo, but they're, oh, actually, yes, I can. If you see this right here, that's a little cocoon. But they are sort of a cloudy, yellowy, orange shape. And that's the eggs. So in this anatomy, you can see that the mouth and the anus look fairly similar to each other. But this is really important to know about worms, because at least when I was growing up, the very common thought about worms was that if you cut them in half, both of the parts of the worm will survive. Unfortunately for us, fortunately for them, I guess is a good way to say that. That's not true. No, fortunately for us, unfortunately for them, that's not true. If you cut a worm, depending on where the that part will survive. So if you cut a worm like this before the clitellum, where the mouth is and the intestines are, unfortunately, they're not going to survive. I wouldn't advise cutting a worm in half anyway, but just so you know. So another cool part about worms that you might notice in this anatomy is that there's no eyes and there's no ears. They are very cool animals because they feel. I like to say that no eyes, no ears, just vibes, because they can understand the pressure in the air. They are feeling the things that happen in the soil. They're the first to know about a lot of things. So one reason why you might see a lot of worms on the pavement after it rains, or if you have a worm bin, which congratulations, they might be on the top of the worm bin or on the top of your garden bed. That's because they can feel the biometric pressure difference in the air. And so they can tell when it's about to rain. And so they come to the surface of the soil that they're in, so that they don't drown. And they're going to do that wherever they are. They're going to do that whether they're inside your worm bin or outside in the ground. They're going to come to the surface. And some of them, if there's pavement around, escape the waterlogged soil by wiggling onto the pavement. And unfortunately, some of them do die that way, because then they can't find their way back to soil, or it gets really hot and it cooks them, or cars, or whatever the case may be. But that is one reason why it's difficult to say the lifespan of a worm. It can range from upon birth to 8 years. It really depends on their environment, the size that the worm grows to, the amount of predators that the worm has, because worms have virtually every single predator that there is, even the ones that don't eat or just herbivores. Worms get digested by accident. So a worm lifespan is pretty difficult to figure out, But if you have a worm bin and you're keeping your worm bin super well and you're noticing that they're very happy, then you might have one worm around for 8 years. It's pretty cool. Another question, or really less of a question and more of a statement that I get, is that worms are invasive. And I wanted to clear up that language. There's about 16 million plus different kinds of species, but 16 million different worms out there that we know about. There's so many kinds of worms, and it's impossible, I think, to say that every single worm is invasive, which is why or at least to North America, which is why I like to say there's a difference between non-native and invasive. And that is really in the language that we understand. So when I say that something is invasive, you might get a picture of something that's completely taking over the ecosystem, that's pushing out other native plants and animals, that is changing the way that the ecosystem functions, changing the plants that are allowed to flourish there, changing what we are allowed to grow there. And some worms are like that. You might hear about the jumping worm or about the flatworm, and that is true in that case. For red wigglers and African night crawlers and other worms that are not completely taking over, non-native is a term that I think is better. They are not native to North America. North America does not have any, as far as we know, North America does not have any native worms. However, in this ecosystem that we've been handed down post like 1600s colonization, the soil has completely changed in shape, especially here in North Carolina, because cash crops like tobacco and cotton were grown so voraciously. We have pretty crappy soil, or in some cases no soil at all, just hard clay. And having worms is incredibly beneficial to our soil. We can introduce worms and potting soil and compost, love compost, and integrate that within the clay and have the worms chew through that, break it down, and make the soil more breathable, meaning that rain can filter in and filter out, meaning that roots can grow further down, and that the native plants that are still around are still kicking here today. And yeah, I like to use that difference between non-native versus invasive. Although they technically mean the same thing, we just have a different picture of what that means. And it's the same for vermiculture versus vermicompost and compostables versus compost. So for our drop, we call it the Compostables Drop program at the Durham Farmers Market, particularly because compost and compostables are two different things. We've noticed two things happen over the course of our sojourn into the Compost Drop program, that compost is used to signify either finished compost, the dirt that's usable for plants, and the food scraps. And so we've run into an issue where we say that we're accepting compost, and that some places say that they can give compost back, and people are like, we don't want our compost back. But in reality, the dirt is the compost, and then the food scraps that you're accepting are compostable. And so we call them compostables. It's a very small change in language, but I think it's really beneficial to understand that at home, when we're putting food scraps into a bucket, that's not compost. They're compostables, and then they go to be composted. They go to become compost. Same thing with vermiculture and vermicompost. Worms are actually not composting. They are eating and pooping. And so vermiculture is just a better word. They're creating castings. They're not creating compost. Compost is created through a completely different process. Worms cannot survive in the compost making process because it gets to be very hot, and worms don't like it above like 80, 90 absolute max degrees. And compost, in order to be used on edible plants, needs to get at least to 130 degrees Fahrenheit. So big difference. That's why we like to say vermiculture versus vermicompost. But those two are interchangeable. You'll see both, but at least for us, language-wise, pretty important. And that brings me to talking about the Compostables Drop program. This was a super cool program that was started unofficially in June of 2022. At the Durham Farmers Market, people came up to us and asked if we knew of a place to drop off their compostables. I'll say the language, sorry. If they knew of a place to drop off their compostables, or if we accepted compostables, and kind of got us thinking, is this something that we have the capacity to do? Can we provide this service? How can we manage it? And so we realized we had the capacity. We started pretty small. I think we had one 50-gallon bin that we started with, and some days we didn't even fill half of it. So it started off pretty small, and we had a very small list at the time, not this list that you see here. This is the finalized list that was created after multiple iterations of realizing that, oh, we need to include this, oh, we need to put this in the do not accept, we need to make this explicit. So yeah, it's been a really interesting process. And in September of 2022, we were surprised by a grant from the Durham Farmers Market and No Kid Hungry. They are sponsoring us right now until I think September of this year, September 2023. And then there's a possibility for renewal depending on further grants. So it's really exciting to do something like this. I think it's a really cool community model, something that was started because community came forward and asked us if this was something that we could do, and we realized we could do it. Creating a really awesome closed loop system where people are buying produce from the farmers market, eating them, and then bringing them to us as compostables, and then we get to compost them. So it's a really cool program, I think. The program is, I don't like to say it's free because I feel that devalues the labor that we're doing, but the cost that a person would pay is being subsidized by the grant that we received. And yeah, it's been a really awesome way to engage with other people. It's also upped our business. More people know about us, which is very cool. We get a lot of people coming to the market, realizing that we're there because people are dropping compostables off. And it's just a really awesome way to engage with the community. Here you see our what we do not accept, which is the red, and what we do accept, which is the green. Because we're not an industrial composter, and we do thermophilic compost, meaning that we have a windrow, it's aerated, it's churned, and it is not added heat like an industrial or commercial compost would. We don't accept some things that a large industrial composter might. Like, we don't accept compostable plastics, we don't accept the bags that say they're compostable on them, which leads me to the challenges that we have faced. So there are some really interesting developments in the market right now, such as the compostable phone case or compostable bags. And that name compostable has become a sort of greenwashing. If you haven't heard of the term greenwashing, essentially it's when businesses just say something is organic or compostable because those are words that sell. Those are words that in our time where climate change is a massive, massive issue, people are more and more attracted to ways that they can be regenerative in their lifestyle. So putting compostable or organic on a product will draw in more customers or create a bigger fan base than not having those words. And people come to us and try to compost their goods that way, and find that if they're not a commercial composter, they unfortunately cannot be composted. Some of those items, or actually all of those items that I've run into, like the compostable phone case, they are made with bioplastics, and so we can't accept them. Also, as of last year, if you put on Amazon, at least, if a company puts compostable on a bag, it doesn't actually have to be compostable. As of last year, California was the only state in the United States that outlawed that. They actually sued Amazon for that. North Carolina does not have the same financial status that California does, And so that lawsuit can't happen at this point, but it is a big issue that we've run into where things will actually be made partially with plastic and also be partially compostable. It doesn't mean that they're actually able to be composted. So that's something that we've run into. And in order to avoid contamination issues, we just don't accept any of that. We pretty much stick to the produce with no stickers and all of this stuff that we have mentioned here. Oops. Another challenge is education. Since there's not like a citywide class that everyone has to take about how to compost, it's not something that most people know about or know how to do. Especially we've got a lot of people moving in from very urban places where they were able to compost or really able to give their compostables to the city, and it was part of their taxes. We have found that a lot of people don't actually know what goes into a thermophilic composting pile, and they are not very educated on exactly how this works. So that has been a challenge that I feel we have addressed very well. But another challenge that goes along with that is that since we service the Durham farmers market primarily, it's a pretty small demographic. It's a fairly, in terms of Durham, fairly high tax bracket, fairly specific racial makeup. It's mostly white people, mostly affluent people. And so because our mission is to make compost education and composting very available widely for all kinds of people, I've run into the issue of wanting to get more out there, but also recognizing that we're sort of confined by the demographic that comes to the Durham farmers market. Also, we've noticed that there is just competition with the compost monopolies because we don't accept as much as a bigger composter would. We find that people tend to go for the just throwing that in there and not really thinking about it process rather than going for a more a different approach like we do with the ASP, with the aerated set up pile thermophilic compost method. Just depends on the ease that you want, but it is a challenge that we run into with the program. But something really cool that's come of it is that we are building our community so wide. We are known. Someone came up to me at the market and asked if I was the woman at the Durham farmers market who sold worms. And that is in I think my whole career, something that I'm going to look back on and be very pleased about, because we're known now. We're known in the community. We're known outside of Durham. We're known in the Triangle. We're known in Virginia. It's just, we're known, we're known nationwide because we ship nationwide. So it's very cool that people are growing in awareness simply because we exist and because we're helping to educate them. Being Black and brown people operating the compostables market naturally also invites people who look like us to want to participate too. So even though we run into a small demographic or really a specific demographic being at the Durham farmers market, we find that our positionality and intersectionality in the world invites other people to come and learn from us, which I think is really important. And also, part of the fun that we've been having is that we get to meet people at their education level and then bring them up with us, which is what we can do through talks like this at the Durham farmers market. If you are aware of what we do there, and if you come visit us, we like to talk, and we do talk very often. We like to talk to everybody. So those have been some really awesome community building things that we've noticed have occurred in this really short time period. It's been almost a year since we've unofficially started, and we now service in our composting about 100 households and 215 people, which is amazing. When we started, I think we had 10 households and about 15 people. So it's amazing that we've grown so much. And a lot of that is because of people sharing it, because of us posting it on Instagram or us willing to talk to people about it. And now we're at the point where we have to kind of stop accepting people into the program because we don't have enough space for them, which is an incredible problem to have. So with that, I want to say thank you so much for being here. Thank you for learning more about us. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to learn more about worms. And I hope that when you see a worm next on the pavement, you can pick it up and put it in the soil so it can survive. Thank you so much for being here, and I hope to hear your questions.
Thank you so much. That was great. That was great. I love hearing about the worm anatomy. I think people just take these creatures so for granted, and they're so amazing. Love what you're doing in the community. Definitely a ripple effect. I think we've got someone maybe with a question since she's showing her face. Christine, you want to take it away?
Yeah, I think one question, do you have to worry about any kind of persistent herbicides with the hay, or is that you can stop that at the source? Do you have to, ask that question up front? Just curious if that's something that is kind of built into your system.
So it's actually something that we talked about. That's one of the questions that I asked when I actually first joined. The horse farm, I guess, that we accept straw and manure from, they don't use persistent herbicides, which is great. We don't get people bringing in hay and straw to the composting program at the farmers market, but I tried to compensate for that by putting on the do not accept list, no chemicals of any sort, no insecticides of any sort. So maybe that's something new to add to the updated list of putting that in parentheses. But yeah, that is something that is really important to not accept, because that can't be composted out, unfortunately. And that is really harmful for if you're then using those that compost on food, even if you're not using it on food plants, but if you are, it's definitely harmful. But yeah, our compost doesn't have any of those. But one cool way to learn if you do have that, the NC State Extension does have testing, and that's where we do ours quarterly. So that's great. Even if you're not in North Carolina, I'm pretty sure. So yeah, pretty cool place. NC State Extension. That's a good question though. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. And I really enjoyed your presentation. So thank you so much for presenting today.
That's very kind. Thank you very much. I saw in the chat there is from Dawn, are red wigglers the invasive kind that have become a problem for folks abandoning / dumping their worms? No, red wigglers are not that. Oh, Corey responded. Sweet. Thanks, Corey. If you don't have them at the chat, Corey said the most notorious invasive worms are known as Alabama jumpers, which are a different type of more aggressive worm. I want to be very clear also with the Alabama jumpers. If you look up a video of Alabama jumpers, you'll see that they're jumping and wiggling. And I want to be very clear that all worms jump and wiggle. It's a response to predators. They try to wiggle out of the area that they're in, or if they're in a beak of a bird, trying to wiggle out of that, or try to make it seem like they're not the one that wants to be eaten. So I want to be very clear that if you have a worm bin and you open your worm, you open the top and you see one kind of jumping and reacting, doesn't mean that you have jumping worms. It might mean that they are startled by the sudden exposure to light or to your hand or something like that. But they are problematic. They do look different. They're brown, fully brown, like in dark brown and light brown. So they do look different than red wigglers, which can range from like a cream, pinkish, red color. Oh, thanks for coming, Amy. Yes, like Corey said, red wigglers can be problematic in some ecosystems where they can consume too much forest litter and cause problems. Red wigglers are super cool in that they know how to control their population to the amount of food and space that they're given. but when they're given a lot of food and a lot of space, they multiply and they multiply. So in your worm bin, it's not going to be an issue, but in a forest floor that has a lot of dead materials, they can be an issue. But in my research, I've seen that pretty much contained to the Midwest. Any other questions?
I have another question.
Wait, let's do it.
Say a local government or a business would want to, start vermicomposting themselves.
Yeah.
Could they contact y'all and contract y'all out to come and do some trainings for them and help get them set up? Or is that
that's very cool? That is something that could totally potentially happen. Where are you all located?
It was just a general question. Just curious, since I work for the state, just wondering if I get anybody interested in starting, but would want to, be connected with someone who's already doing it and is well versed. I'd love to, make that connection and see if there could be any cross-pollination.
Sweet. Cool word. Corey, if you want to direct message Christine, if that's something that we can do, email or info@newsoil.org is our general email. Newsoil.org is our website. You can find Corey's contact information on the website as well if you want to go that route. I can put it in the chat. Thanks very much, Corey. You're the best. Newsoil.org. Info@newsoil.org is our email. Yeah, that sounds awesome. Oh yeah, Dawn, totally. Yeah, I've listened to that. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I think there can be a lot of hysteria around this idea of invasive species. And that's why I like to say non-native versus oh, thanks, Christine, so much. Thank you for your questions. I think it's really important to have a different kind of language, invasive versus non-native, because there's a lot of things that are invasive in name, but are actually in some cases beneficial to the ecosystem that we have now. So we've just gone through a lot of iterations of ecosystems, and they change every so often, especially with climate change. We're getting unprecedented heat, unprecedented cold, unprecedented rain, hurricanes, all of that stuff. So as our ecosystem changes, the things that were once native and flourishing aren't going to be there anymore. And it doesn't mean that the things that then take over are necessarily bad. I think that having a bad versus good binary is not helpful in terms of the environment. Yeah, oh, thanks, Muriel. Yeah, I think the distinction is really important. Yes, Don, like honeybees. Don, you're very cool. Yeah, thanks for your anecdotes. I appreciate them. Any other questions?
I have a question about other farmers markets.
Yeah.
If there was someone from another community that was visiting, what advice would you give them if they're like, I shop at my farmer's market, I want them to start vermicomposting or composting or a drop off? Maybe that's the main thing, actually.
Yeah.
I want them to start a drop off. What advice would you give to either farmers markets or to the public that attends them? Since it sounds like what you're saying is very community driven.
Yeah.
So what advice would you give?
So this has happened before. Someone asked me for advice on how to do it. So you can contact us and we can help you out with that just to start off. I would also say to start off that it's a very noble idea to have a compost drop off. In actuality, it is a full-time job. So I think going into it with the idea of oh, this would be cool. Who can do this? Making sure they have the capacity to handle something like this is of the utmost importance, especially for farmers. They're doing other things. It involves a lot of time, and a lot of farms, some composting systems that they have aren't as efficient as they could be because composting is a full-time job. So when you're locating who in your farmer's market can take this on, keeping that in mind, I think is really important. But also there's definitely especially if you're in a metropolitan city, some kind of composting business that might not be, yeah, exactly. I love that. And I think composting as a full-time job really encapsulates that compost has value. So I'll get into that in a second. But if you're in a metropolitan city or even in like a big town masquerading as a city like Durham, there's definitely a compost business that's in that town or in that city. And maybe they're not using their farmers markets as a place to gain business or a place to understand more about the community. So if you can find a composting business that's already doing it, that already might have the capacity or maybe is looking for expansion, and propose that idea to them, maybe you can even get yourself a little side hustle in the process. It's pretty cool. In terms of composting as a full-time job, one thing that we were trying to figure out before we got the grant was how can we remind people that compost has value. I think it's difficult because with trash and recycling waste, those costs are hidden. You're paying for them in taxes, you're paying for them, and you're not seeing every month, or maybe you are if you are paying for that, but you're not seeing that come out every single month. And so you're taking it for granted because you're not really actually paying for it in your mind. Compost is a little bit different. You are paying to, or hopefully you're paying to have that service. And so a drop-off program like we were doing where you get to drop off for free wasn't ultimately working for us because we were, one, devaluing the labor that we were giving to the project, but also devaluing the labor that other people are doing for composting. And so if we have a free service, then it makes it seem like, oh, Compost Now, which charges much more money than free, is bad automatically because they charge money for it. No, compost does have value. And what we do, the labor that we do perform has value, and we want it to be seen as such. So I would also say to the person who might be asking about the Compost Drop program, just to remember that getting people to pay for the service is actually a very important part of composting in general. You're not giving us your trash and we're not like taking care of it for you. Yeah, I think it's a really important way to think about it, especially if there's other composting businesses in your neighborhood or in your community. That pricing yourself at a good point is important, not just for you and your labor, but for all of the other businesses around you. That's a great question, though. Thanks, Mariel.
I love it. I feel like it's a great model. And especially that the farmers market themselves found value in it and willing to invest, to support a business. And it's just so exponential for them. What kind of feedback have you gotten from the farmers market management about their perspective? What do they think?
So they wrote and submitted a grant last week to continue our program. So they're super into it. That's great. Yeah. I talk to them every week when I go to the farmers market and just like have a small check-in just to talk about, have you heard any feedback? Or you like recently people have been asking us if we could be there on Wednesdays. Yeah. Super strong endorsement for sure. People have been asking us if we can be there on Wednesdays because the Durham Farmers Market also has a Wednesday market. We don't know right now in this stage, but Saturdays are pretty good. So we also have other community partners like Iglesias Church on Roxborough in Durham, Root Causes, which is a Durham and like Duke operated organization. We were doing picking up compost or compostables from Table NC. We are currently doing outreach at an event right now. I guess one could say education at an event. Recently, there was an event at Northern High School, which is basically across the street from where we are right now, where Gary, the CEO, and Corey, who is on the call right in the audience, I like that language, in the audience right now, the COO, they went to Northern High School and talked to students, which I think is so cool, just so that they can see that there's so many different kinds of jobs out there. I feel that compost and vermiculture is not seen as like, people say green jobs. this is the greenest job, I think. And this is just really cool to be able to talk to children and youth about it. We've done other tabling events. I did Farm Aid last year, which was pretty cool. When Corey presented at the USCC Compost training last September, which was great, and have graciously agreed to present again this year. Very cool. I didn't know that, but that's super exciting. People were really jazzed about that event too. And also, if you want to get compost training and you want to be like the ultimate master gardener, I definitely endorse that training for sure. I got my training last year. Thought it was really cool. I learned a lot. Yeah, we do other events like that. And I think the continual farmers market is just a outreach event. I mean, we also are for profit, so we're gaining money and everything, but we're encountering so many people that have never heard of vermiculture and have never thought about composting. So it's constant education happening. That's a great question, Dawn. Thank you.
I actually love that that cross section that you just brought up with the actual act of collecting the food scraps and then also selling the vermicompost at your booth and other products, and like how that. I'm curious, how are you like converting people from just drop off people to actually growers through the process? Yeah. Or
that's funny. Yeah, conversion. Yeah, a lot of people that come by. So we get kind of two kinds of people that come by. People who live in apartments that are really close to the Durham Farmers Market. And they're like, I moved here from Seattle and we had a citywide composting program that was through the city waste management, but I don't have that here. And I'm so happy that you're here. Can I sign up for the program? Which is great. In those cases, they don't have the space to compost, or they don't want to introduce worms into their household because they might have a pet or because they're not in their apartment a lot of the time. So in those cases, it's hard to like convert those people. But in other cases where people are like, oh my gosh, you're here. I kept worms at one point. I just moved. I can't keep them now. And then sometimes they come back and they buy a worm bin from us, which is super cool. Or they start to buy compost because for a year they're letting their garden rest and they want to get the bed ready. And so they get compost from us or castings from us, which is very cool. Yes, not everyone loves worms. Especially like there's a lot of parents I've encountered that like worms, but the kids are like, yeah, I have found that it's less, we never really have to sell the compost program. For us, it's always like you can join or not. But if you're here and you want to learn more about it, you're probably going to join. And so let me tell you about it. Let me tell you how you can sign up, tell you what we accept. And for the composting, people sometimes even beeline to our stand and they're like, I came here just for you. I just want to buy all the compost that I can, which is amazing. It makes us feel really good. And yeah, like I said, being the worm lady at the Durham Farmers Market is a high honor. So yeah, I think that we do talk people into buying worms, or at least get it on their mind so that they're aware of it. Yeah. Oh my gosh, we're almost out of time. I think we have time for like one more question before Kate goes into Kate's corner. But any other questions?
I'm gonna steal that name. That's awesome.
That's good.
I just wanted to bring up one other thing, just because I love what you were saying about the entrepreneurial, like not just worms, not just talking about composting, not just about, you know, recycling food scraps and returning it to the soil and growing food and the farmers connection, and really trying to reach into all aspects of community. I think that that's really important too. Thank you so much for bringing that up. You know, anyway, I think that we're probably going to have more of these composting conversations, but, you know, Corey and Gary going to North Northern High School and talking to kids just about the entrepreneurial possibilities that are in doing something that you love doing that makes you feel good and, you know, is beneficial to your community. Like it's just, it's a skill that has just, you know, can be replicated in so many different ways. It doesn't have to be composting.
Yeah.
But I think also, I just want to mention, out of the COTSI course last year, there was a fellow who has like family farmland and wants to start I think he is starting a compost collection in Hillsborough.
That's who I was talking about. He and I have connected. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about. So there's a farm in Hillsborough that will take the food scraps that he can collect, compost it in Hillsborough. So then you start having these kind of like micro climates, if you will, of, you know, compost collection and, food scrap compostable collection. See, and then returning that into the soil locally, like, you know, in Durham for Durham. And yeah, anyway, it's just really exciting. So
yeah,
I have to stop talking. Thank you.
No, we agree. Yeah, totally. Yeah, like I said, community building is really cool. And that training program, compost operations training course, was super beneficial to just not only connect with other people who want to do the things that we're doing, but just to hear what's happening all over the world, because it is an international training course. People come from like all over the place. So yeah, it was just really cool to hear about the different initiatives that people are starting. There was one really cool program that was starting in Minnesota. I think it's called Tidewater. Super cool what those people are doing. And yeah, and it's a pretty small operation, but that's happening all over the place. So when I said that, if you want to start a composting drop off or pickup or something like that in your neighborhood, your community, your city, your town, there's probably a business that is trying to do the same thing or is doing the same thing. And so you're in good company, and I would connect with them if you can. But yeah, thanks so much for being here. Thank you everyone for being here. Kate, take it away.
Thank you so much, Genesis and Corey. That was phenomenal. Just want to let everyone know we were recording, so we will be sharing this out. So please feel free to share it to your networks as well, get the word out. Just have a couple of really quick announcements here. We do have our May 18th Sustainable Spirits coming up. That is next Thursday at Dos Taquitos. It's an unstructured event for the most part, but we are doing a plant swap, which is a really, really well attended event. So I put the registration link for that. We also have our annual members and friends meeting coming up on June 15th and have a great slate of speakers. You're going to hear about some of our grant programs we've been working on. Here's some updates from Christine with the state. Hear from Laura Kavanaugh, who's doing some really cool research with compost and DNA. So I've got a link right there. That's at the plant in Pittsburgh. And also that night, we have our 10th anniversary of Sustainable Spirits. So that'll start directly after the annual meeting is held. Pop that link in there as well. So please register. We'd love to see you there. We also have recently revamped our newsletter. So if you are not subscribed, pop that link in the chat. Please go ahead and sign up for our newsletter. We send it about 1 to 2 times a month, and it's looking fantastic. A lot of really good content in there. And we've also recently, we've been doing a lot of work here at the Composting Council, have been working with a social media consultant and have really beefed up our social media outreach. So if you do not follow us, please find us on Facebook, Twitter, and now Instagram as well. Muriel, any closing thoughts?
Thank you so much, Kate. Oh, we are doing a lot. We have done a lot. Again, this is the first ComCon for International Compost Awareness Week. Just learned earlier today that Governor Cooper signed a proclamation to make this International Compost Awareness Week a thing statewide. And so that's really exciting too. But thank you, Kate's Corner. Thank you again, Genesis from NewSoil Vermiculture. That was brilliant. Any closing things from the audience? All right.
Corey, do you want to say anything?
No, I just really enjoyed it. So thanks everybody for coming out.
Thank you.